Hello and welcome to a Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings battle report. In this game we're playing my old Dominion against Dweghom, and the scenario is head-to-head. So this is the list that I'm trying out for this scenario. What we have here are a couple of experiments alongside a bunch of basically just good stuff. So this is a 3-warband Old Dominion list, and it is running very few upgrades on the characters. OD characters are very good, but you can also run them without anything in particular. So we have a Warlord Archimandrite with 0 upgrades. It's running just the base 100 points. You can absolutely add things to an Archimandrite, but they're not essential. 2 spellcasts, particularly if you have ample number of devout units in your list and he's just looking to buff them, totally fine. Likewise, we have an unupgraded Hierodeacon. If I had 15 points spare, I would probably try and get an Arcane Retinue 1 on the Hierodeacon. They do benefit from it, but again, not essential, just nice quality of life. And then finally, we have a Xhiliarch, and a Xhiliarch, coming in at 135 points in this list, is the only character with any upgrades. What the Xhiliarch is packing is the default basic combat loadout for when you don't want to spend too many points, which is the Sword, Calamitas, and Gladiator, which gives him +1 attack, +1 cleave, flurry, deadly blades, and parry. That is a very cost-efficient setup. You can improve him by paying for a combat retinue, but the combat retinue offers diminishing returns by increasing his clash when you already have flurry. So if you get him to clash 4 and then are inspired either from charging or tier 3, then you rerolling 6s already from being inspired on Clash 4, you don't really need to pay for the flurry, so you get quite a good efficient loadout by just taking those 2 artifacts, and it keeps his cost at 135 points. In each of the warbands, we have a 4-strong unit of Kheres. This is a risky size, but it is relatively efficient. 4 Kheres at tier 3 can action, draw event, get to Priest 12, which gives them a very powerful insanity spell. But the more I've been playing with 4, the more acutely aware I become that they are a little bit shatter bait at that level, and I am considering trying to find points to move them up to 6, where they are still very good. They're not efficient at range that way, but they're very efficient spellcasters, and they're much more shatter resistant. We then have a unit of 5 Legionnaires with a Profane Reliquary. This is a unit I've been experimenting with for quite a few games now, basically just trying to make Legionnaires do something. And this is probably the last game that I will play them in. They weren't terrible, but they also weren't good. They were deeply mediocre in the way that Legionnaires just are at the moment. And the more I play them, the more I'm coming to the conclusion that you just kind of, as Old Dominion right now, you just take your lumps, you take minimum sized Legionnaire units to put support characters in, you don't put them anywhere near the front line, and you expect nothing from them. They are a deeply mediocre unit, and yes, they are our cheapest mainstay unit, but they aren't focused in any particular way. They're kind of just not very good at everything, whereas compared to some other units, like, for example, Hold Ballistae in Dweghom, or the wonderful mercenary crossbowmen in 100 Kingdoms, where those units have got strengths and weaknesses. A unit of crossbowmen in 100 Kingdoms, it's fragile. It will disappear to an offensive spellcast or even a sufficiently large range volley, but it does something at a relatively cheap cost. Whereas Legionnaires they're a little bit sticky, but everything in Old Dominion is a little bit sticky. They're not particularly dangerous. There are these problems with Legionnaires. I am trying to make them work. This experiment, taking 5 Profane Reliquary, trying to leverage the fact that Profane Reliquary also buffs the character, really hasn't worked in multiple games now. Ultimately, these Legionnaires will be cycled out anyway once we have access to cultists, but for now I'm going to complain about them briefly and then move on. 4 Bone Golems, absolute all-stars, fantastic unit, tough enough that you can take them in a unit of 4. They're not Shatterbait because they're just too durable to try and do that many wounds to. If you can do 18 wounds to unit of Bone Golems in a turn, you deserve to destroy the regiment, but really good all-rounders, and in particular offensive all-stars, because they do both high cleave hits and high volume hits with Aura of Death. They can always find a target. Hierodeacon, excellent, benefits Dark Power, plays with the Archimandrite to kill and heal your regiments, and the Hierodeacon is just in a minimum unit of Legionnaires. They will die and come back and die and come back, although in this game they will actually mostly just die. Restricted in the Hierodeacon slot, we have a 5-strong unit of Caryatids, and this was the big experiment for this game. It's actually been a little while since I have used Caryatids in a game, and I've previously mostly only used them as 3-strong regiments. and they can be inconsistent for the points cost at that level. It's very easy to fire 12 shots on volley 2 and just miss everything and feel like your regiment doesn't do anything. And so my idea was, well, look, normally I wouldn't take a ranged unit in that kind of a size because concentrating fire is difficult, but with Caryatids, once you have Memories of Old, you have fluid formation. So they should actually be able to get everything in sight and line of fire. Maybe they are okay, maybe they are better than okay at that size, and they would do pretty well. And then in the Xhiliarch's regiment warband, we have Praetorian Guard, 5 strong with a banner, no Aura of Death in this setup. You could easily put it in if you had the points for it, and I might have the points if I cut those Legionnaires down. And then the good old-fashioned 4-strong Legionnaire Varangian Guard with a standard bearer. So this is a slightly low activation count. I would usually go one more, but everything in it is serving a purpose. Even the Legionnaire units. One of the things that I would like but didn't have is really just more disposable bodies to put on objectives, and we'll actually talk about where I made some mistakes about that and how I played this list once we get into the game. But first, let's look at the Dweghom list I'll be playing against. So this is my opponent Tom's Dweghom list, and it is a little bit of a list of all-stars of Dweghom. Totally unsurprisingly, it is running a Tempered Sorcerer Warlord with the bells and whistles. 160 points affords you the Focused Mastery and Arcane Retinue 3, and those are just extremely effective. This is the most dangerous to your opponent spellcaster in absolute terms in the entire game. No character will do as much damage as the Tempered Sorcerer can, all the while generating elemental potency tokens for you. Now, because the Tempered Sorcerer is a light character, he can't make a unit scoring, so he's going to be in the Fireforged this game, and the whole Ballistae will just be moving forward, providing fire support by themselves. And then we have, and this scared the bejesus out of me, 2 units of Inferno Automata. Now, Automata are, I don't know, maybe a little fragile by Dweg standards. Not really that fragile, to be honest, relative to their cost, but they are incredibly fast, incredibly dangerous, and in particular, they are very good at fighting stuff that I don't want killed in my list. They will go through Legionnaires like the runs, and they will go through Kheres very effectively. Their presence is going to significantly hamper how I want to play my first couple of turns, and although they ultimately will do damage and will cause casualties, their presence really pins me back. Also, Tom's Inferno Automata look excellent. You will have seen those in the thumbnail for this video. Green Flame, Chef's Kiss, looks awesome. Next, we have a Tempered Steelshaper with Arcane Retinue 1 in a unit of Hold Ballistae. All of the units, by the way, have standard bearers. And this I really like. Although I wouldn't usually put the Tempered Sorcerer in Ballistae because he needs to be protected. You want to put him in the tougher Fireforged, the scoring Fireforged unit. I think the Tempered Steelshaper absolutely can and should go in Ballistae. He provides extra range attacks to them, gets them onto the board more quickly, and he is a medium character, which means that he will make the Hold Ballistae into a scoring unit. It's easy to contest them because they only have one scoring stand, but the fact that they can get up the table early and get onto a zone is going to be hugely decisive this game. It will significantly influence the course of this game. Given the cost, this is not too expensive. I love this pairing and this warband. I love this warband genuinely because it's got Steelforged in it. They're the best medium unit in the game. I don't think it's particularly close, but they are the best in a generalist kind of way. They have basically just good attacks. They are dangerous. They aren't like mind-bendingly dangerous, they're just quite dangerous, but they are fast and intensely durable. The Defense 5 Resolve 4, just native Defense 5 with 5 wounds, it's difficult to understand how much that impacts a unit's survivability. But just to make kind of a point of it, if you think about just number of hits, like Aura of Death hits it would take to destroy a 5-wound Defense 4 regiment, it takes twice as many hits to destroy the same regiment at Defense 5. You are effectively doubling the amount of damage your opponent needs to do to you when you go from Defense 4 to Defense 5. That's massive. It also works the other way, which is why Cleave is such an important rule. So Steelforged, absolute linebackers. Tom is getting his painted. You will see them in this video. excellent unit, and frankly, you could just about make a Dweghom army out of these kind of warbands plus the tempered. Then finally, we have a Hold Raegh. He's a little expensive at 140 points because he is packing Tactical Retinue 3, which is mostly Tactical Retinue 1 is very good, adds Indomitable, but he's going to be in the Thanes, which are a heavy unit. It will give them flank, so Tom can choose. Basically, by the time turn 3 rolls around, Tom can choose exactly when the Thanes and Dragon Slayers arrive. Now, for the cost, that's a little expensive. That's a nice ability, and absolutely would pay for Tactical Retinue 1, but going all the way up to Tier 3, I'm not sure about, particularly since Tom will often hold the Dragon Slayers back anyway, so you aren't like bum rushing the field with them. Thanes, generally though, Thanes are an excellent unit. The Hold Raegh, he'll also have Relentless Blows, so he's pretty good in combat. He's not like a Xhiliarch. You can make a Hold Raegh into an absolute blender, but in this case, he's just kind of dangerous, and he's in the Hold Thanes, and the Hold Thanes here have a Standard Bearer and a Herald of Fire, which puts them at 5 attacks each, and this is just a wonderful, versatile, well-rounded unit. They have good clash, good defense, good number of attacks. They're just good in a very generalist sense, and they are actually even comparable in durability to Steelforged. Defense 5 is better than Defense 3 Hardened 1, but a lot of the times there isn't a difference, and you have more wounds in that Hold Thane regiment. They start off a little bit cheaper, even after you've added the Herald of Fire, and they're cheaper to add wounds to. Yes, the Hold Thanes will do a little bit less damage, but once you've upsized that Hold Thane regiment above a certain point, it actually genuinely begins just about competing with Steelforged, which is to say it begins just about competing with one of the best units in the game. So a lot of time for Hold Thanes. What they don't want to fight are things on the extreme end of like Cleave. That's not great for them, but if you can just put them in like any kind of a fair fight, they're lovely and well-rounded. Then we have 3 Dragon Slayers. Dragon Slayers, I would make the observation, are a unit whose kind of reputation precedes them a little bit, because they, in previous sort of iterations of their design, they have been so powerful. They are still very, very good, but what they mostly are like decently tough can openers. Cleave 3 is incredible. Defense 3 Hardened 2, it's further down that spectrum. I said that like the Thanes at Defense 3 with a shield, or Defense 4 usually Hardened 1, wasn't quite as good as Defense 5. Dragon Slayer's the next step down. Defense 3 Hardened 2, yeah, you will just about always get your Defense 3, but that's only Defense 3. It means that weight of attacks against the Dragon Slayers can be a little bit of an issue, but they are premier can openers. At 230 points with a Standard Bearer, we can call them pricey but worthwhile. They are much more of a balanced unit now. Very good, absolutely. Like, good unit, but they're not the, like, most ridiculous heavy can opener in the game that they have been in previous versions. They are pretty solidly fair. Now, because this list is led by the Tempered Sorcerer, it'll be following the Tempered Creed. Although this is one of those, I think the Tempered Creed as a mechanic, if you go online and you read about it, there'll be a lot of complaints. I think it is probably much more fair now than it has ever been. It is still excellent, and in particular, it's very easy to notice when it comes into play and just think like, you just stopped me from doing anything. How is this fair? But it takes quite a lot of effort to build those tokens up, and these days, the way that the Creed works, where you only get tokens from casting spells, even with the Steelshaper coming onto the game early, generating some tokens early, there's going to be a limit to how many of those, like, just total no-sells the Dweghom player can pull off, and I think it's very, very good as a rule, but it is not like, this needs to be changed. It's just very good, very nice, very fun. I have honestly considered playing Dweghom just for access to some of the things that we see here and that rule, because they are super cool faction. With that said, on to the game. So here we are, having seen through the first turn, and we're going to do that because this was not an interactive turn. You will notice that there are no Old Dominion units anywhere on the table. Let's go through the table first and the scenario, and then talk about what has happened. So what we have here are 2 relatively small forests. These forests are obstructing and hindering, so they will block inspired and impact attacks from medium and heavy regiments that charge through them, as well as blocking line of sight. Although these are like regulation-sized terrain pieces, and in the sense that they fit within the guidelines of terrain proposed in the scenario rules, they're really too small to block much actual line of fire much of the time, but we have positioned them pretty aggressively. We then have 2 water features, these swamps here and here. They are just water, not dangerous or anything, but still water. We have 2 impassable terrain pieces, these Wardrune-style tents, and then we have 2 sandstorms. So we're using these to represent sandstorms. Imagine the sort of like dust swirling up and around them, or desert storms of some sort, and they are just circular zones that are obscuring. So this is a pretty basic terrain setup. We have plenty of terrain pieces, but we're not doing anything particularly wacky or wonderful. There's no dangerous terrain. There's no like big long river features. There's no garrison terrain either. Garrison terrain, something is locally. We do use garrison terrain in games, but only in some games because it's like when garrison terrain doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, and when it does matter, it's really strong. It's hard to have garrison terrain be kind of like a balanced experience, so we'll put it on about half of our tables generally. Anyway, as mentioned, the scenario is head-to-head, which means we have one large zone here and then two small zones here and here. I quite like this scenario. It plays very nicely. It's good. It's balanced. It is a kill point scenario, so you'll get points from killing characters, warlords, and regiments, which means a lot of points can be accrued that way. Does the scenario need it? I have no idea. Is it play with it fine? Yes, but mostly what is happening is you're having a big fight over this zone, because both players can move in towards this zone. But then also you have pressure on the other side of the table where you can't score your close zone, but you can score the far zone. So both players are kind of incentivized to push in this direction, but nobody has to commit. It's that you get this really interesting and like nice textured tension, I guess you'd say, where sooner or later someone is going to begin moving pieces sort of, in this direction or maybe in off the table edge, and then the other player has to respond. But until they do, the focus is really all on this. And we can see that in how the first Dweghom turn has played out. Now, just as a preamble for this game, this would be a game of interesting dice. And by interesting dice, I mean Tom's reinforcement rolls would be perfect the entire game. The only time he did not bring a reinforcement profile on was because he chose not to, not because he failed a roll. Every single roll would succeed. However, by the way, my reinforcement rolls would generally be bad. Most of my army would not turn up until the last turn that it could. However, the entire rest of the game, every other dice roll we made, my defense rolls in particular were off the chain. I was passing 75% of defense rolls that I would expect to pass 50%, that kind of thing. It was half again as good as you would expect. So there would be a real sort of skew of luck here, where right now we look at this and we have this situation where by God, the whole Dweghom army is beginning to turn up and I have nothing. I have nothing because I've chosen not to bring my Kheres on, which I will explain. But Tom otherwise is going to be absolutely done in by dice this game. It was still an interesting game, which is why I'm reporting it. It was a very fun game, which is why I'm reporting it. But just pour one out now for Tom's dice, or Tom's efforts in the face of my bullshit defense dice over the course of this game. So I've chosen to hold the Kheres back, and the reason why I've chosen to hold the Kheres back is that Tom has 4 light regiments, 2 of which are Inferno Automata. And Kheres are very good, and they're quite dangerous, but they are most dangerous if you can just shepherd them into the late game where they can start casting the really powerful up-leveled insanities. Early in the game, they are capable enough skirmishers, and they're very useful to have in that role. I really like putting Kheres, 1 unit of Kheres, sometimes 2 in my list. Rarely more than that, but 1 or 2 is really nice. But they will melt to Automata, because Automata they're not a cleave unit, they just inflict lots of hits, and with Aura of Death, particularly my 4-strong Kheres stands are very vulnerable to being shattered by even just 3 Automata. So with that in mind, I've chosen to hold the Kheres back this turn. That means that they won't appear until turn 3, as late as they can, which is going to be a little bit annoying. That's how my reinforcement rolls will go this game. But I think that's probably the price to pay for not, that's what I had to do to not have them monstered by Automata, because if we think about I've only got 1 light unit, Tom is always going to be able to leave the Automata to deploy where they can hunt Kheres, because even if I win the roll, or I choose how the roll goes and I make Tom go first, he's going to go Ballistae, Steelshaper as his first 2, then Ballistae. The Kheres will come on well before the Automata do, and they'd get hunted. So the Kheres are staying back, and we have to look at this Dweghom list turning up here. This Ardent Querag, to note, is proxying the Steelshaper. This is the Steelshaper's unit with the Hold Ballistae, and totally unsurprisingly, they are making a beeline for this zone because they're going to stand in it and start scoring. This is one of the reasons why I love the Steelshaper in Ballistae. It's a no-frills, super good scoring unit that can get up early, which is exactly what they will do. So here we are at end of turn 2. To explain what has happened here, we will start talking about what happens before we see the pictures soon, but this is the easiest way to do it for now. Everything has continued to move forward, and my reinforcement rolls have continued to be a little bit mediocre. I rolled about the expected number of mediums, the Kheres didn't turn up, it's totally fine. And this is probably the part of the game where I made the biggest mistake. Now, what I've done is I've brought on my Warlord, my Archimandrite in the unit of 5 Legionnaires, and my Hierodeacon, with the idea being that they would start getting dark power flowing. See how there are 2 wounds on this unit of Legionnaires? That's because the Hierodeacon has killed one of the regiments with one of the stands with his Dark Shepherd draw event, and then I have healed it back with 2 wounds with the Archimandrite. So by the end of this turn, I have 2 Dark Power because the Hierodeacon also cast their spell successfully. I'll get another 1 next turn from the Blasphemous Soma. So that clock begins to tick up, which is nice. But how I've deployed them, I think, is incorrect. And to explain why, we need to peer into the future a little bit. In this scenario, there's going to be a scrap over this objective. With all of this Dweghom stuff on the table, and these Inferno Automata in the positions that they were in, you'll remember that they were like there, and this unit has hardly moved. Anything that I push forward is going to get shot and collapsed on by the Automata, which means that how I'm going to play out the next couple of turns is very, very patiently. I am going to not extend units forward to be destroyed. I'm going to keep them back and safe until my battle line can be established. I'm going to play this game very, very patiently, which means that this regiment is not going to move forward significantly more. And if they're not going to move forward significantly more, they should not be blocking the future arrival of regiments that could actually move up to contest. If we think about how I want this game state to ultimately evolve, I want a bunch of big, heavy stuff in this space here, contesting this zone, while I just sort of like threaten to peek around here to get towards this objective with my lighter elements to draw things forward. Particularly now that these Steelforged have been committed, how an ideal deployment would be something like Varangian Guard there, the Archimandrite's regiment there, and the Hierodeacon's regiment like way off back here, looking to move kind of like in this direction, around like that, fight the Steelforged and break through, so that all of the rest of my stuff can fight in here, all of the actual dangerous stuff. I did not need to commit towards this central zone, and I should have recognized that. Instead, I bought the Archimandrite regiment on here, kind of just thinking that I needed to move something forward to contest, but I was never going to. I was never going to feed this unit into the teeth of 2 units of Fireforged plus ranged fire from these Ballistae, and so this deployment was a mistake, and it would be the biggest mistake I will make this game, and I mentioned how good my dice would be this game. That's the only thing that will bail me out. So at the end of this turn, because this Steelshaper has gotten into the zone, the Dweghom player will go to 3 points, and now let's jump ahead. So here we are at the end of turn 3, and contact has started to be made. In particular, this unit of Inferno, this is the main action. This unit of Inferno Automata has come around the flank here and taken a swing. Now I've won, this would be the only turn of the game. No, there would be others, but I have won supremacy this turn, and these Caryatids, the 5-strong unit, has turned up, fired an unaimed shot into this unit of Inferno Automata who are hanging out here, and has done no damage, or almost no damage. And that would basically be the only bad dice roll I would make the entire game, but it was a bad dice roll. However, the Inferno Automata have then charged, they've slammed into this unit here, they have done quite a lot of damage, but importantly, my Hierodeacon goes before the Legionnaires do, and she pops the hell off. She rolls 5 hits with her Unholy Baptism, whatever that spell is. Not Unholy Baptism, like Black Flame Coruscation, I think. She rolls 5 hits with Black Flame Coruscation, and Tom fails 4 of them, and then fails every resolve check, which combined with the 2 wounds the Caryatids did, kills 2 stands of the Inferno Automata, and massively limits the amount of aura of death I will take. This Legionnaire unit will then take some damage. We've got 2 wounds sitting on this unit right now, but they unbreak themselves. They are going to die next turn, but they aren't dead yet. And I actually have a tiny window to save them, but I'm not going to, unfortunately. Otherwise, we can see that the game of patience has continued to play out. The Steelforged have moved forward. My Varangian Guard have moved forward up here, and this is an ideal matchup. This is one of the few reasons why, as mediums, Steelforged, their one downside in big aggressive sarcasm quotes is that they are a medium regiment, so will often turn up early and aggressively, which usually puts them in a position to absolutely pound the paste out of your opponent's light skirmishing regiments, because there's no light skirmishing regiment in the game that can reasonably fight them except maybe Bow Chosen, thanks to precision. But because they've turned up, I can counter-deploy them with my Varangian Guard, and there is no unit in my army that is better for fighting them than Varangian Guard. Cleave 3 goes a huge way against the Steelforged defense, and so this fight I'm happy to have. You can't see it, but bone golems have turned up over here. I have trouble getting a 6x4 table into the full frame, but there are basically bone golems hanging out here at this point, and otherwise we are being very, very conservative. This unit has actually moved backwards from their previous position because I'm just getting shot. I'm not willing to move forward. Nothing about the situation has changed. I'm still not willing to expose my flank to Inferno Automata, and the Hold Thanes have turned up, which makes this even worse. If I'd chosen to bring my Praetorians on more aggressively, they haven't arrived yet, by the way, then maybe there's a potential window where something could have happened and I could have pushed this flank. And actually, if my reinforcement rolls had been better, that is to say, if they had been good, because they were fine in terms of mediums. If my reinforcement rolls had been good on turn 2, I would actually have Praetorian shoving right now, but they have been delayed, so they haven't turned up yet. Otherwise, these Kheres have marched, and this was a little bit of serendipity, but I'm actually really happy with this formation here. Speed 5 regiments are very awkward. They can't leapfrog one another without marching or march charging, but Speed 6 regiments can natively just overlap one another very, very easily. Over the course of the game, we will actually see basically fire and advance, where these Caryatids will move forward and shoot, and then the Kheres will move forward and shoot, and it actually felt really nice. And having the Kheres screening the Caryatids was totally fine. The Caryatids can see over them very, very easily, and if the Kheres get engaged, they aren't compromised in the same way that a ranged unit like Caryatids would be. Because they can cast spells in combat, their melee is terrible. It's very, very bad. But they can cast spells in combat, and so they are not useless in combat. In fact, they can be surprisingly dangerous. So this is potentially a formation I will experiment with more in future. I'm not sure about it yet, and the Caryatids can go anywhere. I could put the Caryatids behind anything and that would be fine. But this was just one of those, it came up in play as an experiment, and I liked it. And so we will think about doing it in future. And those kind of moments are some of my favorite in wargaming. So at the end of this turn, the Dweghom player goes to 6 points. And from here, so this is the end of turn 3, we will talk about how turn 4 went out from this position here. So the big moment of conflict around who will win supremacy is this fight here, because there is a very good chance that whoever wins supremacy gets to save a unit in this space. If I win supremacy, I will be able to do something that will clean off this this golem, save this unit, and let this unit of Hierodeacon and Legionnaires basically pull back and not give up 4 VPs. Or at least force my opponent to maybe shoot them with these Ballistae or something, but potentially I could save them. If I don't win this roll, then they are probably going to die. And I don't win the roll. Now, what Tom elects to do is not actually try and rally and kill them with the Inferno Automata. Instead, he just aims and shoots with this unit here. He only needs to do 2 wounds. This is a unit of Hold Ballistae. All of them have range and line of sight. It's a nice clean shot. He fires, 10 shots, hitting on 3s, hits with 5 of them. I'm Legionnaires, so I don't make any saves because they don't have any defenses worth a damn, and the unit dies. I get to make one clash, 1 attack with the Hierodeacon, but that's a neat 4 points for Tom, which puts him on 10. And these units are destroyed. Which is a little rough, but it is what it is, and at least this Inferno Automata unit is broken. I actually end up going, I think I had, on terms of my stack, I had the Hierodeacon and then Archimandrites, something to that effect, I don't remember exactly. But what will happen is then this Inferno Automata will charge into the flank of these Kheres, and then the Kheres will cast Insanity and kill it. Now, there was actually a rules question here, which is, so the Inferno Automata is lined up like that, it's exactly flush. Do the Kheres have line of sight? And we weren't sure. I could do a reform. I think I actually got this wrong because there wasn't a line that I could draw that was 1 millimeter wide from my front arc to his front arc, even though technically speaking, because we're corner to corner, his front corner is touching my front corner. So and touching counts as in Conquest, but I think I did that incorrectly. I think I cast Insanity when I didn't have line of sight. So this was probably wrong. Tom, I apologize if you watch this, because I didn't also have the line that could be drawn from me to him. Now, kind of that said, if I had known that that was how that would go, there were always a bunch of options here, and the Karyatids could have destroyed it, etc. But it is worth noting that there was a rules mistake there, and I will try and remember it in future. Otherwise, not a ton has gone on, but there will be a lot of exchange of fire. So with the Inferno Automata dead, I will begin starting to put Caryatid shots downrange now. Some wounds will be placed on this unit of dwarves, this unit of Hold Ballistae. The Inferno Automata will get into this unit here. They won't do too much damage, etc. And the Steelforged will end up backing up, and the Varangians will pursue them and actually march charge. They'll march charge mostly just to prevent a charge from the Steelforged, which would get benefit from their impact attacks. Otherwise, I am continuing to play it very cagey. The Praetorian will turn up this turn. They're going to end up over here, and we might actually jump forward at this point. And this gives us a better idea of how this turn has ended, because there have not been any more decisive conflicts. There's been exchanges of fire, units going, pew pew, pew pew, pew pew. But so far the damage is just kind of ticking up. But what the Karyatids are doing actually is they are really draining Tom's elemental tokens. Because when those things fire into Hold Warriors are saving on 1s. That is a pretty good use case for spending an elemental potency token. And indeed Tom will be doing that. So I'm actually happy with the pressure that Karyatids are exerting, and exerting pressure on a Dweghom force, forcing them to spend those tokens early is really, really good. Otherwise, we can see the Praetorians have moved up here. It's going to take them a little while to reach the battlefield. And it's kind of at this point that I begin to realize how much I would prefer them to be in this space here. The Archimandrite unit is engaged, but in relatively good health against the unit of Inferno Automata. And yeah, the Bone Golems are just kind of posturing here at this point. The only other thing to note is that the Dragon Slayers have moved up, and now they're very close to the table edge. They've walked on and then reformed this direction, so they are facing the Bone Golems too wide. The Bone Golems are deployed 2 by 2 because there's just not much space here, and the Dragon Slayers are facing them too wide as well. This is an okay fight for the Dragon Slayers, but it isn't quite as good as you would think, because Aura of Death on the Bone Golems is very good at doing just enough hits to wear the Dragon Slayers down, and there are more Bone Golems. The Bone Golem unit is a much bigger unit. It's a 4-stand, 275-point unit, compared to the 230-point Dragon Slayer unit. Now, in terms of scoring, at the end of this turn 4, I am on an almighty 2 points from the single unit of Automata that I've killed, and Tom was on 10 from killing this character unit, 2 points of scoring, and he's now on 13. So this is a pretty scary moment in the game, where I feel like I'm not up on attrition. We've lost very close to the same number of points, and I am well behind on scoring, and the game does not feel like it's developing in a way that is good for me. And at this point in the game, I'm pretty sure if my luck had bottomed out, I would not have been able to recover. I do still think being patient was the right thing to do, because if I had been aggressive, this score would honestly not be particularly different, because Tom would have made up the difference by killing this unit much, much sooner. And that's going to end up being relevant. I think patience was right. It's a 10-turn game, and Old Dominion especially have to remember that they stay in the game. The game for Old Dominion is a 10-turn game. And I'm being very patient. I'm just like the Fire Sorcerer hanging out here in the Fireforged has still not made an attack, has not cast a spell. I am keeping the token number down, but it feels 13-2 pretty scary. So jumping forward to the end now of turn 5, and we can see that this patience is continuing to be in play. This fight over here is going well for me. The Varangians and the Steelforged are slapping one another, and the Varangians have been rolling quite good for their defense rolls. They've only taken 3 wounds, and they've killed a stand of Steelforged. And that kind of damage, even if the dice rolls begin to change, mean that the fight is now going my way, and it's going to be difficult for Tom to reverse without putting force into that fight from somewhere else. These guys have wheeled to fire into the Varangians and did very, very little damage. The Praetorians have reformed and marched and begun their long march towards a part of the table they actually want to be in. And then we're seeing once again the overlapping fire in advance between these 2 units. So the Karyatids have put a bunch more damage into this unit here. The The Kheres have moved forward and done... I think they actually whiffed a spell. Trying to cast through interference is always going to be a little bit of a challenge. They whiffed a spell into the Fireforged, but they're getting in those kind of positions. They're moving forward, moving forward, moving forward. I'm actually beginning to pressure the game now. No, I know what they did. They worked with the Archimandrite, so there are a bunch of Legionnaires left. The reason there are Legionnaires still alive despite the Inferno Automata is that the Archimandrite went pew-pew and killed like a whole stand, and then, or a stand and a half. He rolled very, very well. And then the Kheres contributed as well. They did a draw event, March, Insanity, 8 dice, and they, between the two of those, again, good dice rolls for me this game, they finished off the Automata, and then the Archimandrite's unit just booked it backwards. There's no way in hell they can fight these Thanes, it's just not going to happen, so they have pulled back. And then off screen here we have, I think the Dragon Slayers have actually just charged into the Bone Golems to set up for a fight next turn. So at the end of this turn, once again, we're on 16 points for the Dwarves. And have I killed any? Yep, I've killed another unit, so we're at 16-4. So this is the end of turn 5. We're at the halfway point in the game. That's actually really worth mentioning because at this point I was looking at the game state being like, I don't know how I recover this. But if we look at how the attrition is beginning to tick up, I'm in combat now. I'm beginning to have the fights that I want. My guns are beginning to point at the things I want them to point at. We've crossed over into Dark Power Tier 2, and Tom is beginning to have to contest zones with genuinely useful things. This is beginning to be the part of the point in the game where all of those light units have begun to falter, because they're not that dangerous. They're not particularly strong regiments, and that's relevant. This is a 10-turn game, and it's going to be turns 5 through 10 that will just barely save me, in addition with the really, really good dice I've had all game. So rolling into turn 6, a number of important things will happen. We're going to start seeing some major and decisive conflicts, and I'll actually describe them before we flick over. What is going to happen is I will win initiative. These Varangian guards will wipe out the Steelforged and then charge into the crossbows. The Dragon Slayers will try and monster the Bone Golems, but will just not quite get enough damage in. And then these Kheres will make an Insanity attempt into these guys. They will actually fluff the roll, then they will charge. I think they needed a 2+. They're about 8 inches away, and they will tie up this entire regiment so that the Sorcerer, the only spells that he can cast are into the Kheres, and Kheres are relatively well positioned to survive Sorcerer spells because they provide interference themselves and they have loose formation. It's not going to be enough because between Firewall and Coruscation he will destroy 2 stands, and then what he'll actually do, and I really like this, is he will blow something like 5 tokens auto-hitting melee attacks with the Fireforged regiment in order to destroy the last stand and shatter the Kheres. So the Kheres are going to make the ultimate sacrifice this turn. They will be dead by the end of the turn. But doing so will have bought time, and that time will allow these Praetorians to march forward, close the gap to something like 10 inches, and then make a flank charge. And this flank charge is going to, we have to like really measure this to make sure it was possible. If it hadn't been, I'd have just gone into like these guys all moved forward or reformed or something. But because I could make this flank charge, rerollable 5 is actually better than 50% chance. I'm going to end up in about this position here, once again engaging the Fireforged. And that flank engagement is really good, because a flank engagement against Fireforged when the Sorcerer is all the way over on this side of the regiment basically means that the Sorcerer is not doing anything for an entire turn. Now, he's already basically blown up a 210-point regiment by himself. He's a very, very scary boy for a 160-point spellcaster, but I've limited him, and now I can start declaring duels with the Xhiliarch, which is going to be really, really good. Otherwise, in turn 6, the Karyatids will wipe out this regiment. This is quite a badly wounded unit already, and there is 5 of them. They do a lot of damage. This unit is 330 points, but they will do damage with that many shots. Memories of Old, Armor Piercing 2, and so that's nice. That will score me another 4 points. That puts me on 8, and then the Thanes, but the Thanes will occupy this space here. At the end of this turn, the last thing I'm going to do, the Bone Golems will belt the Dragon Slayers, won't kill them, but will badly wound them. And then I make the choice between, do I charge with the Legionnaires or not? And to jump forward, I'm actually going to choose to do that. I'm really loath to actually make this charge, because this unit, if it dies, is worth 6 points, and the Thanes will annihilate it. Legionnaires do not stand up to Thanes anywhere in a million years. But if I don't charge, then my opponent's just going to charge because the unit is worth 6 points. And if I let him do that, I give him the opportunity potentially. It would pull him off of the objective, but it gives the tactical initiative to him, whereas if I move up to here, I hold him in place, and I open up a potential flank charge with the Bone Golems in the next turn. So as we're looking here, the score is 19-10 moving into turn 7, so there is still a significant Dweghom lead, but the kill points are beginning to show. And this is the tipping point in the game. When we move forward into the next turn, what you will see is, yes, this unit is completely dead. There is no way that they can survive those Thanes. They get annihilated. The Dragon Slayers are still alive, barely in frame as freaking usual, but the Bone Golems are beating them. Partly off of the back of dice, because I've been rolling quite well this game, and partly off the back of healing from the Archimandrite before she dies. But the Bone Golems are winning that fight. The Karyatids are still online. A combination of attacks and duels has shattered the Fireforged. They're broken right now. They barely get to reform. They get dueled again, which breaks them again, and then I basically position to get the Xhiliarch into combat, and they get monstered. Flank attacks into Fireforged, particularly from a character as dangerous as Xhiliarch, are very dangerous, and the Varangian guards kill this unit and can begin the march in this direction. So when we end turn 7 and jump into turn 8, we can see the board is developed thoroughly in the Old Dominion favor. The score is something like 24 to, I think I'm on, what have I killed? I've killed the Warlord, 2 characters. I'm on something like 18. It might be, I think it's 16 points at this stage from that Warlord kill the previous turn. Actually, it has to be 18. I killed the crossbowman as well. And this 24 points, even with the extra point of scoring here, no longer looks insurmountable. This Legionnaire unit is almost dead, but the Thanes have suffered as well, and we can see this is turn 8. There's going to be this turn, and then turn 9 and turn 10. My lead no longer looks as far, like the Dweghom lead is not as far behind as it was. Now, what will happen? Yes, this unit will be destroyed. Old Dominion will go up to 30 points, but then the Dragon Slayers will die. These things will charge into the flank. It's a clash charge, so that's going to put me on 20, and then shots here will wipe this unit out, which puts me on 24. So we're already 30 for 24, and there are no units left in the Dweghom army. And what that means is that as we roll into turn 9 and turn 10, I'm going to be able to score this zone, and I'm going to be able to score this zone with the Varangians, which will net me enough to cross over the line. Now, it's only going to cross, it will be ultimately a victory to Old Dominion by a margin of something like 8 to 10 points, which is not a huge win in the scheme of things, and it is almost entirely off the back of a number of dice over the course of the game that kept units alive far longer than they should have. But as often seems to be the case with Old Dominion, it is a lesson in the fact that the game lasts 10 turns. And you have to think, you honestly, in Conquest, the more I'm playing it, the more I'm learning that the game has this genuine dramatic arc, and you have to pay attention to like all parts of the game where you have like small amounts of power, large amounts of power, small amounts of power, and the fact that Old Dominion follow a slightly different curve to everyone else, where for most players you have a curve where it's like, oh, I've got a lot of, all my units are here, oh, they're all dying. Whereas with Old Dominion, it's more like that, where you are weaker and weaker and weaker because your units are just not as strong as your opponents for much of the game, but they're harder to kill and they're still here. And then you have this like peak of strength in these final turns. And that's the part of the game where, oh, look, these Varangians, where that's the part of the game where it's like, oh shit, the inexorable tide of the Dominion. Yeah, it takes until like turn 7, turn 8. This is turn 8, and the game is now in a state where it's, I mean, it looks, if you showed me this at the end of the game, I'd be like, oh, well, that player's just won. Yeah, but getting there was tricky, and navigating it took some luck. A lot of luck, frankly, particularly in terms of getting past the reinforcement rolls that happened early. So, super interesting game. Once again, a reminder that if you're playing Old Dominion, think about all 10 turns, because you have to think about all 10 turns, because it's turn like 7, 8, and 9 that you have the greatest potential window for strength. But yeah, once again, a super interesting game. Tom is just an incredibly lovely opponent. I've never had a bad game against him. He was infallibly polite when I was rolling 50% more defense rolls than I should have, and thank him very much for that, because he's a wonderful person. So this was a cracking game. I was, by about halfway through the game, expecting to be doing a report about a victory by Dweghom, but I think I played most things reasonably okay, capitalized well on luck, did not bring my units onto the table in the way that I think in retrospect I should have. I mentioned that before. I think this part of the table really was where the Praetorian should have been. They were not deployed in a good position, and the reason why was that I was a little too focused on bringing something on to contest the zone, when that was with units I would never have contested the zone with. In terms of the Caryatid experiment, I quite liked it. I will probably run 4 or 5 Caryatids again. The nice thing about having an outsized unit is it's not really efficient to upscale them from like a points or mathematical perspective, but what it does is it just means that they are that much more likely to roll close to average. They are a bit more reliable, and you can point them at a unit and be like, yeah, even if they roll badly, they'll probably do the last 3 wounds to that unit of Dweghom. And that is kind of interesting. They've got a much higher chance of doing damage that is not chip damage, of doing damage that's like, that's a stand destroyed. Minimum, they'll destroy a stand, which means that because they're activating in a certain way, like it just lets you plan for impact, and I like that. This is probably the last game that I will try the upsized Legionnaire units, unless something about them changes. I've given them a good hot crack, but I just don't think at least the way I play, I don't think I can make Legionnaires work as a combat unit. I will take them in lists as attacks, but there's nothing that I find they can fight. I've done, even with Aura of Death in multiple units, I found out they've done very, very little with them. So that's fine. It's 105 points I can save by trimming that unit down to minimum size, or 65 points I could save if I leave like 1 in there just to make the unit a little more resilient, because it is housing the general after all. And there are things I can do with that. There's actually quite a lot. I could upscale the Praetorian unit even further. I could put a whole bunch of stuff in the Praetorian unit. I could even just, if I was willing to play 5 points down, cutting the Profane Reliquary and 2 stands of Legionnaires would get me 2 stands of Kheres. And a 6-strong Kheres unit is a very different proposition in terms of the strength it exerts early game. It is harder to cast Blasphemous Power on, so you will sometimes risk not being able to juice them, but they're pretty good in those numbers. That unit can carry into the late game and be very scary, so that's something to experiment with. Overall, though, I did like this list. It was fun playing with Caryatids, and I hope you enjoyed this report. As always, I'll be along for more next time.